That was staying in about a minute.
There's no sound.
He's got music on his set, creating us. If it was, one day I'll show you one.
You were getting worse telly these days.
Oh, that's fantastic.
We might have to.
Yeah, you were getting worse telly these days.
That's
Your
fantastic.
attention. You have to go.
Yeah.
It is really nice.
That's the whale.
I have it. Groundwork Trust. And the Groundwork Trust.
Oh,
I'll go Groundwork Trust.
yeah.
Did a lot of work on it. Nice. We're live. Oh, that's just funny.
Yeah.
Very old, this one.
Yeah. What to do with me? That's great.
But you still got to go down there and
Yeah.
flag it up. You know. You can still go down there, but not.
Yeah, that's sewage as well.
Not as bad. I still go through and go
We sell theirs. So
Diolch yn fawr iawn am ddod, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to the first event to launch Gorwelion Shared Horizons, prepared by Partin Books and Sustainable Wales Charity. We're launching on Bonfire Night in this week, 2021, because it's occurring in COP26. And as our volume, our 75-page volume anthology of poetry and prose is appearing now from Partin Books and ourselves. This will be the first of several events. Brecon will occur on November the 19th, Merthyr Tydfil on February the 2nd. There are unknown dates yet, as from Machynlleth and the big one in Cardiff, and probably Scotland coming up, obviously London as well. Our chairperson, Tara King, would really like to thank the people present here today, and especially thank Phil Cope and Samantha Wynryddoch for taking part in this first event of Gorwelion Shared Horizons. By the way, people keep asking me, what does Gorwelion mean? Well, if you're local, if you are from Porthcawl or from Porthcawl, Gorwelion is the name of the guide hut in the dunes in Merthyr New Barrows, where many people were brought up. And Gorwelion means horizons. That's why the book is called Shared Horizons. This reading is also dedicated to, if he's looking in tonight, Paul Woodford, who I believe has been unwell and had just returned from hospital. So all the very best to you, Paul, if you are watching this. Gorwelion Shared Horizons. Well, first of all, the idea of Margaret Hinnick, spring, late spring, early summer 2020, when it was then called Our Square Mile, I'm Milton Square, and we changed the title, but the emphasis is the same. 16 writers shows where they come from, look at their own home patch, then extend it into the future, and imagine climate change going on in that future. To begin with, before we hear from Phil Cope and from Samantha Wynryddoch, both of whom have marvelous contributions to this particular volume, which is on sale now and forever at £9 per copy. Before we hear from them, we're going to see Peter Morgan's editing of Mark Minnick's grassroots films, which he made from 1995 and into 1996, I believe. So they're about 21 years old. And honestly, the ideas that she addressed in those films are as current now as they were then. I personally worked in Margaret on a fax machine from Saskatoon Public Library in Saskatchewan in Canada, which is 8 hours behind Wales. And we exchanged ideas, talked about this film, or this series of films. So, but all the hard work, all the research was done by Margaret. And before we hear Phil Cope's extract, Margaret's extract from his new volume from Seren Books, The Golden Valley, about the Garrow Valley, we're going to see a little bit more of this film, I believe. And after that, we'll go straight into Phil Cope and his extract from Gorwelion Launch Horizons. But let's see a little bit at the moment of Margaret Hick's grassroots films.
This is traffic down, I think.
And this was
Yeah.
prizes with my children. I put a coin in the slot and lost everything. I threw a dart and it would be my wife. I fired a rifle and the prizes with my children. I put a coin in the slot and lost everything.
I'm Thomas. Toilets, that's the toilets.
Toilets where?
Cardiff. Well, yeah.
So that's some boys to church.
Evenings, I'm in the arcades. Platforms, video poker. And there was a guy who always turned up at the same time. We hardly speak, but someone sat them down and
I'm Thomas.
play all night. All night, through all night. I was never really to stop. I said to him, I said, listen, I didn't smoke in my life. I bet the holes in my belt. I didn't go so I want to bet myself. I want to wager myself instead. You know what I I threw a dart and it won me my wife. I fired a rifle at the prizes with my children. I put a coin in the slot and lost everything. At night my caravan rocks on its bricks. By morning the sand has built a reef around me. In the darkness I hear its grains on the glass. That's a language I am learning. Brother, sister, do you hear me? I am learning the vocabulary of sand, repeating it in the nights when there's not a sound, but sand explaining how one day all this will be its empire, and how sand will have taken back everything we have won from it. And I believe it's true. I bet on the white car, and it came in first. I bet on the black car, and it came in first. I bet on the red car, and now there is only sand in my pocket. At night in the caravan, I lie on the floor. The sand lies on the floor beside me. It strokes my hair. I lie on the caravan floor naked because today I lost my clothes on the Colossus. And the sand whispers to me, I love you, says the sand. Do you understand, it says. Even the sea is saying, I love you, says the sand. So would you like me to tell you a story? And the sand keeps whispering. It puts its tongue into my ear. Did you ever hear? Asks the sand. Did you ever hear how much gold there is in a mouthful of seawater?
That's a really man's red over there.
It's just featuring
From the tablet.
oh, it's Michael Fox. Michael Fox Albert, and I think it's music. Yeah, it's
That's it.
The album, yeah.
so it was.
That's when they present to the book.
That guy.
Red Truck Tractor to be great.
Took the rainforest.
They did it alongside the
Oh, no, all that's done by an editor.
Yeah.
Yeah, the music from Michael Fox, the words obviously, and the editor concocted. I think you didn't know, but this guy Michael Fox, I think it's famous for programs on the
Sorry, landscapes.
Scotland. Candles. packaging is a lot. Too long.
Well, round of applause, I think.
It wasn't my idea, it was so long that everybody hear that, it wasn't me. I never
Well, no,
thought-
I think congratulations,
Yes.
Margaret.
That's it, they
definitely.
were wearing the same costume twice. So you could roll over it.
I think what was the strongest for me about that was that it's so prophetic, but actually seems so contemporary. It's like, you know, what's changed? And the saddest thing for me about COP26 is the 26th.
Yeah,
It's like, this is the 26th go we've had it,
yeah.
you know, and here we are. And the pictures you show were pretty much, you know, what we saw, what we're seeing still today.
Yeah.
So thank you. I think that's all. I didn't know any of that about you. I'd love to see what you're saying on those things as well.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I'm still going.
Civil War.
Looks like some of them are working and some of them aren't.
Ah, okay. Can we go back to all of them on the screen? And then, can you not pick that one out, the Golden Valley one?
It's not playing.
Okay. Okay, well that makes life a lot more difficult, but never mind, we will plough on, won't we? I was going to say to kick off, I think most of you actually know, I think, about my new book, but for those who don't, I think it was certainly, of all the books that I've done, and I've done a lot, it was the most interesting genesis, really, much more interesting than any of the others. I'm not sure that there were very many positives coming out of COVID-19. There were certainly a hell of a lot of negatives, certainly for me, including two cancelled, maybe three now coming up, cancelled US lecture tours, and also a whole mass of other events and projects that were postponed, both large and small. But there was one aspect of my life that did benefit, I think, from the limitations. Seren, my publisher, commissioned me back in 2018 to write, to illustrate and to design a visual biography of the Garrow, the valley where I live. Then, of course, Corona came along and threw everything up into the air, and the deadline was pushed forward, and we were all placed under virtual house arrest. But I suppose if you have to be stuck somewhere during a pandemic, somewhere where you're, as we were, restricted initially to a 1 or 2 mile radius from your home, the end of a dead end valley boasting 4 lakes, waterfalls, cycle tracks, walking trails, all surrounded by beautiful hills and by the most incredible history, then the Garrow Valley isn't the worst place in the world to be stuck. And if you've also been commissioned to write a book about that place, the Garrow, during that time, that's obviously even better. The pandemic's restricting agenda forced me really, because it gave me a lot more time, it forced me to climb higher and to dig deeper and to discover new sites and new histories that otherwise really wouldn't have featured in the book. It would have been a much lesser book had it not been for COVID. The time and the space made me think, I think, about this land, its ecology, and most importantly, its future, which I suppose was what made the excerpt I'm going to read to you now suitable for the Gorwelion collection. The section I'm going to read is called Beyond Coal. It's not very long. Any biography of the Garw must start not with coal mining, which has become the whole of the tale, though little more than 100-year blip, less than a chronological flicker, but with its hills and with its waters. The land's best conjuring trick is its river always empty in itself but always full, snaking from countless springs before and still along the belly of the valley, taking the steeply sloping land's easiest path, never uncertain in its simple objective, serpent-like in our once and possibly future Garden of Eden. The valleys of the South Wales coalfields, separated by high passes with poor transport networks, and in the case of the dead-end Garw, no passing traffic at all, set alongside the large areas of flat ground upon which to build, has minimised the kinds of employment initiatives post-coal which see the footprints of giant factories as the only solutions. We need to be imagining a very different kind of future, laid out in human trails and bicycle tracks, in accommodation and decent places for visitors to eat and to drink, in Kevin Sinnott's art and Workman's Hall performances, and in the reopening of the railway and all of our energy supplied from mountaintop turbines blown by our nearly always available wind. As history has made an about turn in our cul-de-sac home, we're already returning after coal to a more traditional relationship with the land, in a combination of humankind's efforts to say sorry and nature's own unstoppable reclamation scheme, greater celandine and common valerian, creeping buttercup and wood sorrel are flowering like parallels through the cracks in Garw's ruins, suggesting something possible. And bramble, broom, and common gorse, feverfew, and primrose are rising up in nature's quiet fight back. Our new lakes are alive again with brown trout and frogs, with dragonflies, ducks and dippers, coots and moorhens, and the always solitary and antisocial heron. And a peregrine couple make their annual visit here in a good year, nesting confident now in a wall of quarried cliffs where stone was once cut to build miners' houses. The land has remained, beaten up, of course, its flesh in places gored, but wounds heal, with the days of coal mining now as unimaginable to most of us as the ages of ice or those of the building of the ancient cairns on the surrounding hills to bury the dead. And even if, after all of our efforts, none of the most recent or dreamed of schemes for survival work out for our complex and contradictory species, well, no matter. The grass, the trees, the bushes will soon grow high through the windows of our abandoned homes and shops, rising through the floorboards of our churches, schools and workmen's halls, flourishing again where they always used to flourish. And the extremophile lichen on the rocks of the burial chambers of our Bronze Age ancestors will continue to spread like glorious radiating stains. These, in truth, were always the real survivors anyway, tolerant of heat and Arctic cold, of irradiation, pollution, and even being shot into space. So coal mining's brief century of much gentler poisonings has left little more than a mark on them. In a 1987 interview, just 2 years after the closure of the last pit in the Garrow, Margaret Thatcher complained that there was no such thing as society, just individuals and their families, ushering in a decade or more of the politics of individualism. A similar debate is now raging concerning the nature of lichens and of the myriad other formations of the fungi family. When you look closely at these ancient organisms, it's very difficult to tell if they are single creatures or a vast collective, individuals or one being grouped closely together for safety. 90% of the world's plants depend on mycorrhizal connections, linking them in a vast underground network with nearly every organism, passing carbon, water, nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen, and even alarm signals back and forth through their elaborate circuitries. In what Richard Powers, in his wonderful book, The Overstory, which if you haven't read, I'd really recommend it, Richard Powers has termed this the underground welfare state. I like that. An English botanist, David Reed, named these fine tubular structures that branch, fuse and tangle in an almost infinite filigree below our feet the wood wide web, challenging Darwinian hegemony of the survival of the fittest as the best description for the workings of the natural world, as well as Adam Smith's championing of selfish individualism in a free market. These old new lessons are crystal clear within the smallest and the largest of things. Intensive commercial forestry practices which select and plant only what is thought to be the most profitable of trees, expelling in the process most species of bird, mammal and insect life, and ripping up much of the land's underground communication and support system, have resulted clearly in much less lucrative yields, with much more vulnerability to disease, as well as featureless, dark and silent arboreal deserts. Perhaps from lichens and trees to cities and human relationships, theirs is a more useful way to understand and to thrive within our world. Mutual aid and cooperation were essential, of course, for the people's survival in the Garrow, when intolerable forces were applied to lives and to the land during the harsh years of coal mining. The construction, equipping, and running of workmen's halls and institutes, and the establishment of mutual aid societies were based upon the principles that the health of the individual was more effectively guaranteed by the well-being of the whole, with no one being left behind. In this cooperation for survival model, paralleled by what we are learning about the reciprocity and even altruism of the superorganism of forest and field, the healthy paid for the sick, the working for the unemployed. And it is this spirit that is being recalled in some small ways today in our communitarian responses to the new realities of the COVID-19 pandemic, which only clearly a united co-evolutionary response will defeat, a reaction which begins perhaps to track a path towards a new future for the people of the Garrow as well as everywhere else. The coal, which brought droves of men and their families to this tiny village a little over a century ago, took 250 million years to create, while decaying trees and plants were swamped and compressed. Every 20 feet of vegetation debris producing just 1 foot of coal took us less than 100 years to exhaust it. But despite this and the other alarming evidences, and in the knowledge that we have now entered the Holocene age, the 6th mass extinction period of our planet, the lichens and the rocks of the Garrow, its rich rivers, trees and hills, its birds and fish, its animals, insects and fungi will win. Always were winning, really, despite appearances. After taking their beating, it's clear that the earth is blooming again, one blade at a time, through our detritus of brick and coal and greed. And as the sun continues to rise and fall upon our Golden Valley, the only real question for us today is whether we will decide to throw our weight behind the inevitably victorious team or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil Cobb. And we will now go on without an interval,
Yeah.
I think, with Samantha Wynne Riddoch. Delighted that she'd agreed to be part of this anthology, Gorwelion Shared Horizons. Her horizon stemmed from Ceredigion, Caernewydd, New Quay, where she lives. Her volumes, her books have been published by Seren Books and Picador. I nearly said Parton. Of course, she's not published by Parton, although Picador had published her last 2 collections. Her first collections were from Seren Books, and it was sad to lose her, I know. Samantha will read some new work, which I think for the first time we're going to hear these poems. She'll describe herself, what they're based on, and we'd like to give these poems together a kind of a world premiere. So, diolch yn fawr am ddod. Thank you very much for coming, Samantha Wynne Riddoch.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you, Margaret, for inviting me to read my new work here this evening. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to read alongside Phil this evening as well. Thank you. So the work that appears in this anthology this evening is a sequence of ghazals called Tree Tai Chi, which look at the impact of coastal erosion on the trees in the area that I live in, Cardigan Bay. And on my daily walks along the beach, I see trees falling down the cliff at weird angles, and they're all at slightly different stages of dying. And I find it both heartbreaking and mesmerising, really, at the same time. The increased number of storms have gnawed away at the clay, which in turn has loosened and is crumbling into the sea, taking with it the roots of the trees. And the trees don't fall quickly, but they fall at very sort of graceful angles, and sometimes slowly, so slowly that they move but without seeming to. And sometimes they look in agony, and sometimes they're just kind of clinging on. And the process reminded me of Tai Chi, where there is movement, but there's also stillness, because the moves happen so slowly. So each poem in the sequence looks at a different tree: oak, beech, larch, ash, and the way each tree seems to spell a different letter of the alphabet as it goes down. And I think that it also expresses different emotions. So the letters I've looked at so far have been A for anger, F for fear, S for surprise, E for excitement. So the whole sequence is written in the form of a ghazal. And I started thinking about writing in ghazals because of my own name, Samantha, which is originally Persian. And I wondered what might happen to my work if I were to experiment with writing in that form. And the ghazal is older than the sonnet, so it dates back to 7th century Arabia. It's made up of couplets, and each couplet is autonomous, but it's emotionally and thematically complete. And I love narrative poems. I love poems that have a good yarn, tell a good story, but you can't really do that with the ghazal form because of the requirements of the form. So the first couplet sets up the refrain, which is called the radif, and then that recurs in the second line of each subsequent couplet. But there's also the preceding word called the kafia, which also rhymes. So it's more like a kind of patchwork quilt of cameo moments that build up to a larger picture. And I thought that would suit the subject matter perfectly, really, allowing me to kind of repeat and go back to the issue which is at stake here, which is the coastal erosion. One final point about the ghazal is that you have to put your name at the end of each poem. You have to sign yourself off, as it were, in the poem. So there are different versions of my name in the final line of each poem. Tree Tai Chi 1, Larch. Who can tell whether it's ascending that larch or descending the cliff? Either way, it's a shimmying larch. We're used to seeing it shake blackbirds out of its hair on windy days in March. I call it the larking larch. When the music of the rain stops, it finds itself at the edge of the field, miming a lurching larch. It spells the letter Y with its 2 remaining arms, without knowing why, has no understanding it'll arch. This is Tree Tai Chi Flex the Sky, but how far can you flex before you fall over, Win, are no longer a larch? Tree Tai Chi 2, Oak. If you are a tree, how does time pass when everything happens at such a slow pace? That an oak can be stripped of all greenery by June may be unusual, but well known in this place. Even if you're an oak that's 200 years old, you won't be able to hold on at this unholy pace. Once clay starts to crack in drought or slide in rain, it releases every root. Here, that's commonplace. How much land are we losing? It's disappearing at the rate of 1 metre a year, which is a fair old pace. What does it mean to live without ever leaving the place you were born? Ask an oak about pace. Arms raised in the shape of the letter V, carved with an L and two vowels in its bowed carapace. Not a joke, this was once an oak. Now it's waving goodbye to the list of who loved who in this place. So busy doing tree tai chi, gazing at the moon, they didn't notice the tide racing towards the coppice. You may have the heart of an oak, but that won't save you from drowning, man, at your own pace. Tree Tai Chi 3, Beach. We're all agreed trees need access to water, but what beach wants to be birthed in water? Changed weather patterns can cause clay to give way. Our boundary of beaches seem to be asleep in water. This beech tree is demonstrating tree Tai Chi between heaven and earth, contorted in 3 feet of water. Fish can't see dolphins in this meso soup of branches and mud. Dolphins echolocate them, then creep up on them underwater. Murky water attracts pods of dolphins who teach their young to find fish when they're concealed by clay in the water. This tree seems half beach, half dolphin, as it prepares to backflip off the cliff edge. One leg spelling J for joy, it leaps into the water. Tree Tai Chi 4 is apple tree, and it's the last one in the series that's published here. So I'll finish the Tai Chi poems here, but I have got a couple more which are not the tree Tai Chi poems. Apple tree. There they go, staggering around our apple trees, like an orchard drunk on the fruit from its own trees. One is arthritic, magnetized by the sea's sweet nothings. Another believes erosion does not apply to apple trees. The one in the corner is flirting with the edge, whispering to the dribble of shale on the beach below its family trees. Are these petrified in the Tai Chi pose, row the boat? They must have moved, yet we never see them shift, the trees. One tree is doing a handstand, spelling the first letter of anxiety. This one's just a scribble against the sky. That's poetry. So I'll finish on a poem called Death Watch, which is also in this anthology, and he looks at the Death Watch beetle, and the poem starts with the sound that the Death Watch beetle makes. It's also a ghazal. Who is that tapping? Who's trying to get through to us 5 brothers keeping watch all night through? The call of insect morse is insistent drilling, which our dying dad has known his whole life through. The sheets that bandage his thin limbs and white-beaked head to the bed are soaked right through. He looks like old Father Time, who stopped ticking in the 4-poster beetles have chewed through. Like aristocrats, Death Watch beetles prefer the aged oak of landed estates and warm nights in June to mate through. These rafters, already 400 years dead, were home to forest birds for 200 years straight through. The beetles' teeth chisel their way closer. Dad's dentures rattle in a glass when one of us tries to tiptoe through. This panelled room contains him like a coffin the beetles have started eating through. As his 90 years diminish to minutes, it's hard to take in this man will be a habitat for others to bite through. Given they outnumber us Rodericks 50 to 1, best to live alongside them the next decade through.
Thank you, Samantha Winrunner. I would imagine that's the first time all those poems have been read together
Yeah.
in one go. Marvellous. A kind of a world premiere. Thank you. See, the Green Room brings you lots of things. Also, the Green Room will bring you on the 3rd of December our third Gorwelion Launch Horizons event, which will feature myself and a very fine poet and critic, Laura Wainwright, and we will read our contribution to the book ourselves. The second event is on the 19th of this month, November, in Brecon at 1 p.m. in the Climate Cafe, the Muse Bookshop in Glamorgan Street, Brecon. And Mark and myself will speak and answer questions. Also, Chris Meredith, wonderful contributor to Gorwelion, with a great poem called Steepman Jungle. Will read, and I think there will be a Q&A about why this book has been produced, as if there has to be a question about it. Remember, 9 poets, 9 writers from Wales, 5 from India, 2 from Scotland. We hope with all the events we have, either live or on Zoom or live stream, we will feature all of them by the time we finished, probably next year sometime. Thank you for coming, diolch yn fawr. And I hope you've enjoyed our first launch of this, I hope, worthwhile anthology produced for COP26, but it will be, because of the quality of his writing, it will be current, horribly, forever. Thank you. Could have a drink now. Thanks, Phil.
Ah, great.